Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Off the Crutch. My name is Travis Davis. Now, usually I put out episodes on Monday, but I've been really sick recently and haven't had the time or voice to get this out when I wanted to. I do feel better now, and I couldn't wait any longer because my guest is such an incredible person, and I'm well enough to get this out so you can hear what she has to say. But first, I wanted to share that I received my 2024 end of the year podcast stats, and I wanted to highlight a couple things. First, I was listened to in 21 countries. Now, that may not be much for podcasts that have been out for a long time, but to me, I think that's a pretty incredible feat. When I was 19, I wrote down 15 goals or dreams that I wanted to make happen. One of them was making an international impact. Now, I've had people from other countries listen to my podcast for years, but this was the first time that I actually realized that I wrote this goal down. So the realization is new, but the amount of people who have listened to my podcast outside of the country is not. I feel really appreciative that even one person listens to my podcast, and I'll reiterate that next year is going to be even better than this year. I also received the top 5 episodes from this year based off of downloads, and I briefly want to highlight each one for any new listener. So here we go. Number 5 was Real Talk on CP Insights from Future Physical Therapists. I interviewed Allie West, Cameron Samurai, and Dylan Werner, who are currently in physical therapy school. Last year, I spoke to the class and they did some assessments on me. I enjoy hearing their passion for helping people and being able to answer questions in such a vulnerable setting in person like we recorded. My goal is to have on guests that you may find interesting, but also give more insight into my life. Unlike most people who go to physical therapy, mine is what's called maintenance. So regardless of how many times I go, it's only going to do so much. I think all 3 are going to be incredible physical therapists, and I look forward to seeing their great accomplishments down the road. The next one was my conversation with Mike Porth, who is the founder and CEO of The Mighty. The Mighty is a growing community of people with lived experiences sharing their honest stories. They help people connect with others around mental health, chronic illnesses, rare disease, disability, and more. What stood out to me about Mike was the way he pivoted careers from being a journalist to this one. The inspiration behind it was his daughter, who also has a rare disease. He found a way to build community so that other people with similar experiences can come together in a positive way. It's a wonderful website, and everybody should definitely check it out. Number 3 was my conversation with Amber Seeley, the director of Disney's Out of My Mind, which came out very recently on Disney+. I don't need to spend too much time talking about this, as I have a whole podcast episode dedicated with my review and thoughts. Amber is extremely talented, and I cannot say enough good things about this movie. Go watch it. When I interviewed United Cerebral Palsy CEO and President Armando Contreras during Cerebral Palsy Awareness Month in March, things seemed to come full circle. I did some fundraising for them over the summer, and they flew me out last year to give a talk at their annual conference. Anybody with CP or a parent who has a child with CP would benefit from listening to that episode because you can learn so much about what they do and find out if there's an affiliate in your state. A lot of great resources and one of my favorite organizations. It's hard for me to not talk about cerebral palsy even when I don't want to, but I know that my life is not about me, and as long as there's air in these lungs, I'll continue to use my disability as a vehicle to help others. The quote-unquote top episode is with Rain Clarkson on resilience, connections, and breaking boundaries. I started the year off with this episode, and it totally set the tone for everything that followed. I admire Rain's resilience to kick ass in a male-dominated field, and her journey is a reminder of how connections can change our paths. I've also talked about this on my Austin episode if you want to listen to it. When I was there visiting, I met her in person, and our conversations were enlightening. Without sounding redundant, her empathy for people of all abilities and desire to connect with strangers and amplify their stories is a strength, superpower, and character trait that not everybody possesses. Check out Rain Chats on Instagram if you want to follow her stranger journey. If I had to use a word to act as a thread for these episodes, it would be hope. Each guest that I talked about in their own way gives or will give hope to other people through their gifts, and that's an incredible thing. Which is a nice tie-in to my guest today, Kathryn Goetzke, CEO and Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company. I was on Kathryn's Hope Matrix podcast last month, and I enjoyed our conversation so much that I had to have her on because she does so much wonderful work researching hope, working with youth to prevent suicide, and to say that she's an advocate for mental health is an understatement. She's a published author of The Biggest Little Book About Hope, speaker, and creator of the award-winning Hopeful Minds, Hopeful Cities, and Hopeful Mindsets. She was recently appointed to represent the World Federation for Mental Health at the United Nations, representing the almost 1 billion people around the world with mental health disorders, and is working to get a resolution passed at the United Nations for an International Day of Hope to ensure all around the world people know that you can measure and teach hope. Kathryn is someone that I truly admire, and you better believe that I'm going to meet her sometime next year. So let's get into the interview. I really believe in the work that Kathryn is doing. So I'm really excited that she is on the podcast today. So how are you doing today, Kathryn?
Hey, Travis. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm feeling incredibly grateful and honored to be chatting with you today. You taught me so much about cerebral palsy and about how to hope, you know, when we get different challenges. So I'm grateful to share what I know about hope science overall.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Before we dig into your background, what would you say started your desire to focus on hope and bring that message to the world?
Yeah, well, it was really, sitting in suicide prevention talks when they would talk at length about restricting access to means. So you lock up your pesticides, your guns, your medications, so that you don't have access to lethal means of dying by suicide, and then also 800 numbers. So you know where to call, what hotline to call when you're suicidal. And thinking to myself, I'm at a high risk personally of suicide. I'm thinking those aren't methods that are going to keep me here, that will save me. And so it then came a deep desire to figure out, if I want to stick around, if I want to be on this earth, I've got to figure out what causes suicide and how to really prevent it from a truly prevention standpoint of root cause. And so I set out on a journey to figure that out, figure out what hopelessness is and how to get to hope. So they were measuring hope, they weren't teaching you how to hope. I'd say I'm at a high suicide risk. I had an attempt in my 20s. I struggled with addiction. My father died by suicide when I was 18 years old. And so there are, a number of risk factors. There's high ACEs score. Yeah, so it was just I've got to figure this out, Can you learn how to hope? And if so, how might you do that? And can you teach it? And I was able to prove out the theory that yes, you can. And as you increase hope, anxiety and depressive symptoms decrease. And so it's a skill that anyone can learn. And if that's the case, I think that's how we solve for suicide, really.
Looking inward to see where you struggle, and because disability, at least mine, is visible, it's something that people see all the time. So for individuals who have challenges that are invisible, it takes courageous and bold individuals like yourself to bring that message out and to have those conversations, because there's a stigma about talking about it. And I'm wondering, do you think that there's less of a stigma now than maybe like 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I spoke at the United Nations on International Day of Persons with Disabilities back in 2015, to talk about depression, my experience with depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, addiction, all of these things. And I was one of I, if not the first to talk about mental health on this specific day, on International Day of Persons with Disabilities. We were working to get mental health included in the Sustainable Development Goals. And, like you say, you don't see it, so you don't think about it. You don't necessarily consider it a disability or really understand it. And stigma is super high, very high when I lost my dad it's 35 years ago. But it's way better now than it used to be. I mean, I think we almost have swung to the other side of the spectrum. We talk about it so much. We talk about anxiety and depression so much. People think that, especially youth, if they have fear, that they have an anxiety disorder, or if they're sad, that they're then depressed. And so to me, it's from my perspective, normalizing the conversation around hopelessness. What is it? What is sadness, anger, fear, which is the emotional despair part of hopelessness, and how do we navigate it in healthy ways? How do we get out of helplessness to action so we can, manage our hopelessness in healthy ways so that we don't develop clinical anxiety or depression? To me, it's normalizing the skills and the things that we can do to feel better and to stay healthy, engaged, and active in society. But yes, I think, and thanks to youth, I think youth have created this massive movement around it, around owning individuality and how they feel and how they're experiencing life, and claiming more power around that and honoring each other around it.
You mentioned your father. Was there another time, like specific time, where you decided that this is the direction that I'm going to go and start this company to where it is now?
Yeah. So when I started my exploration of what causes suicide, I thought I would find a million things, like a million, it's depression or it's anxiety or it's, all of these different things. So I thought it would be really hard to figure out how to prevent it. But when I read study after study after study and saw hopelessness come up again and again and again, and then hopelessness being the primary symptom of depression. So it's kind of a symptom. It's like your blood sugar. It's like your blood sugar gets out of whack is, when you develop diabetes. So that if I focus on this one thing, like I can't think of anything more important for me to be doing in this world than understanding hopelessness really at a very deep level and figuring out how to get to hope and how to teach others to get to hope. Because it's not just suicide, it's hopelessness also is the consistent predictor of violence. It predicts self-harm. It predicts all risky behaviors in youth. And so when I deconstructed hopelessness as both emotional despair, so you feel bad, and then a helplessness. So it's the combination of a sense of helplessness and a feeling horrible. That moment when you feel both of those things together, that's when you do things like turn to addiction, turn to self-harm, turn to violence. Mass shooters comes from a deep sense of hopelessness. And so to me, we need to be teaching these skills to everyone. So that was, hopelessness again and again and again, the single consistent predictor. I thought this is then what I have to focus on. So I put my other company to the side and I, did some work around the nonprofit. And then several years ago, I decided to start a company and brand around it to really figure out how can we operationalize it globally? Because I believe that there's such power in branding, and then my background is in business and marketing and branding. And so if I can create, shine is how we teach hope. And if I can create kind of a shine hope brand, and then we have health education and also that we teach, that hope is measurable. So there's a hope scale. So you can actually measure where you land on hope and then learn to get better. It's like going to the gym. Like, how can we build our hope muscle? Hope is, when I read the hope studies, it predicts how long you live. It predicts how well you deal with adversity in your life and how quickly you recover from illnesses. If you graduate college, how engaged you are in the workplace, if you stay in your jobs, like so many things. And so I thought it's just so important that we ensure all that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I see in my experiences with other individuals with disabilities, because there's such a spectrum where I could tell maybe one person seems less hopeful than the other. But then you take an individual who may have, and I'm just throwing out a random disability like Down syndrome. That person may feel happy all the time. Actually, I've never met anybody with Down syndrome
I
who's been
know.
like that's like sad or mad. And everybody that I've ever talked to, just talk very highly about people with Down syndrome that they've interacted with. When it comes to like the parents, they wonder how they're going to help support the child, or when they die, like what's going to happen to their child when they become an adult. Have you read anything in relation to hope and disabilities?
When you look at hopelessness, despair, and helplessness, so of course, when you have disabilities, I mean, it's basically if you have a challenge, you're likely going to feel despair and helpless about it. So think of having, if you have a disability, you're going to have way more challenges, like depending on the disability, like you say. Or when you go into caregiving, you have many more moments of hopelessness. That's why you're more likely to develop clinical anxiety and depression. Even things like a move shoots up your level of hopelessness. So you think about this, but we're not taught how to hope. So to me, these populations that are high in hopelessness, and we know that, need to be taught the skills for how to hope. So how do we navigate that in healthier ways so that we're not harming self or others? How do we focus on what we can control in the situation and learn to let go of what we can't control? And take action to move towards what we want really in life. So that's part of what we teach. We teach the processes and skills for doing that. I learned a lot of things that were super unhealthy for me that really just drove me into a depression. So it was these things that I learned, that I saw, that I witnessed. I just stayed in my emotional despair. I didn't manage any of it in healthy ways. And then I stayed in helplessness because I focused on things like having my dad around, which is nothing I could control, but I didn't even have the framework to think, I'm going to stay sick if I focus on having my dad around, because it's that state of helplessness that you just keep churning that state of helplessness. And if you get stuck in that, you develop, it's like you stop yourself. So I had to learn how I create a new goal around that. And so, people that are caregivers have to do that. Um, they have to set goals around who will take care of the kids as they become adults. And I think of what contributes to hopelessness. So the emotional despair, when you look at people with Down syndrome, like, do they have that emotional despair? Like, are they stuck in that sadness, and are they in a sense of helplessness? Like, no, they like are they're feeling good because they are taking control of what they can take control of. They don't have that mind chatter, I think, in my experience, telling them the negative bias, or I can't do this, or I'm failing at this, or, all of the things our mind does to keep us in that state of hopelessness. That's our E of the shine framework. Like our mind does so many things to like kind of keep us down. And it's just kind of archaic patterns that our brain has, that until we learn this, and until we learn how to kind of navigate it or question it, or calm it down or quiet it, we can easily keep ourselves in that state of hopelessness.
What are the barriers that you think are preventing hope to be taught as a skill?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of them. One is that a lot of people think of hope as a wish, so they don't, like, and there's a famous book, Hope is Not a Strategy, which I talk about often. So there's a lot of misperception about hope, and really as hope science has evolved and how we're measuring hope. And so that's one thing. I think another thing that comes up a lot is, well, we're hopeless because of oppression and discrimination and these things that are happening in our environments. And if you don't change what's happening in our environment, nothing's going to change. And so the systems, are set up to oppress us. And that is, that's an obstacle, absolutely. And I would also say and suggest that if we stay as individuals and in communities in that persistent state of hopelessness, we are sick and we're addicts and we're killing each other and we're doing all of these unhealthy things that keep us stuck in this cycle of oppression. And, when you learn how to harness your emotions, and people that, you know, a lot of people don't want to hear this from a, white chick. I mean, so, and I understand it. And my goal is to teach everyone how to hope, like you can listen to me or not. But I want people to be empowered with skills so that as they're oppressed and different or discriminated against, they have tools to not turn it against themselves or other people in their community, but to use that as fuel to inform themselves of what they care most about and where they can drive change in that specific system or
Mhm.
structure. So I think that's it comes up a lot. And again, with resilience too, conversations around resilience, it's like, how do I hope when there are all of these things? And I think, we got to stay grounded in our present moment and how, like, where is our power? Like, what are we really passionate about? What are we here to focus on? I believe every human has a purpose and a reason for being here, and to contribute in some way, shape, or form to society. And so it's like about figuring out what that is. And again, like my goal is so that people can navigate it in healthier ways and learn from what I've studied and come to understand about hopelessness and hope.
You mentioned a word that comes up a lot for me is resilience. So, do you think that once somebody's hopeful, they're more likely to be resilient? And do you think those two words are connected with each other?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, the literature has suggested that hope is a precursor to resilience, which I tend to agree with and just what I've seen. Like, you have to first have hope that your future can be better and start taking like steps to get there. And then you're going to have challenge after challenge along the way, as life is not, easy. And so the resilience comes in that. So I do think they're very connected, yet I think you do first have to know how to hope, how to hope for something in your future and how to, feel good around it and take steps and set goals and overcome obstacles and all of that. So yeah, I think they're both very related.
Mhm. Think in my own life, when I look back, there are many times that I've had to adapt. And even when I felt like the future was bleak for whatever reason, had to dig deep inside myself to be resilient and just whatever method that I tried to use for survival, I would say, just subconsciously, because I think when you have some type of disability, I'll just say physical disability, um I think internally there are things that we do subconsciously as means for survival that we may be doing some of the things that um, are taught in terms of how to be resilient. But yeah, I just find that word really coming up more and more with my experiences. And, I think that's something that I try to share with other people um, if I can bring words of hope to others, but then show how resilient that I've been over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I do love about hope is that it teaches us to not ignore the despair, to not
Mm,
ignore or fear or rage or sadness or but to really dive into the emotional component of what we're feeling and listen and learn from it and understand it. I mean, it's when we run or when we just try to get back to the feeling good, that we
mm,
miss some of the brilliance around what emotions can teach us. And I find that, when I dive into my deepest emotions, that's when I come up with my most innovative. Like, I care so much that it just like, I feel like it just changes, like it brings up an idea of how I can solve it that I wouldn't have come up with had I just, kind of avoided the emotion altogether or just tried to numb it through different things, but to really honor our emotions, and learn from them, and like acknowledge them, experience them, feel them, like physiologically.
Hmm.
Just so important and so undervalued as a society, but I think that's where we get our deepest grains of insight, really, on everything.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And I remember on your podcast, you shared with me, or you did the framework that you use, and I'm wondering if you might be able to share some of that here with my listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Favorite. My favorite thing, that how to shine hope. No, yes. So yeah. Yeah, so shine is the mnemonic. So we started with 7-Eleven, we studied it, and then, a couple of years ago I thought, okay, how can I put this into something that people can remember? So we came up with shine based on what we learned. So shine stands for stress skills. So how we identify and manage our stress response. You have, this 90-second physiological response to stressors. So if you learn nothing else or listen to nothing else, just know, there's the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. When someone triggers us, we get angry, sad, frustrated, whatever, or something triggers us, someone, cutting us off in the car while we're driving or whatever, sends us an email. We have a 90-second physiological response with these hormones, cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline. They go through our bloodstream super fast, and we can't access our problem solving and critical thinking. So we're in what we call our downstairs brain, and you make the absolute worst decisions of your life from your downstairs brain.
Mm,
And so that's, it's the first key to hope, because when you think about it, that's when we're violent, we're angry and then we become violent, or we commit a crime, or we choose an addiction, or just all of those things. So stress skills are the first thing. So how we identify and manage our stress response. The best thing to do in that 90-second is to pause, take a pause, a 90-second break, breathing. Learning to meditate can help you become more aware of the stress response and when it's kind of creeping up in your body, and how to kind of self-regulate. You could also do prayer, gardening, take a walk, take a nap, like do whatever you can to just get through that stress response, and then be proactive about managing your stress, in healthy ways. So the second is happiness habits. So how we create and cultivate healthier long-term habits, and specifically looking at our happy hormones. So dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. These are things that our bodies can create naturally. We can take meds, but we can also just create them. We can exercise, we can eat nutritious, healthy foods, we can get our sleep. We can garden, we can laugh, we can smile, we can connect with friends, we can practice gratitude, we can, let's see, what else can we do for our happiness habits? Jump rope, we can play with our pets, also a great stress skill, music. There are so many things that you can do naturally to get these released. So I always think about my mood and I'm like, do I need more happy hormones? And like, what can I do to get them? If I wake up in a funk, I know I've got to like be really proactive about my happiness habits. I mean, there's something physiologically that's happening in your body too. It's not just like my mind decides to not be happy. So like understanding that has been really critical for me. So that's the H. The I is inspired action. So how we set goals, the importance of setting intrinsic goals versus extrinsic, meaning they're meaningful to you and not like you're not doing it for other people, what other people want, or for money or fame, or but like really meaningful things. That's why, if we like, a certain amount of money makes us happy, but any more than that, it's really, we've got to be intrinsically motivated as human beings. How to overcome obstacles to goals, re-goaling is part of the inspired actions. Writing down goals and checking in with someone regularly, we're up to 95% more likely to achieve a goal if we do that. So that's the I. The N is nourishing networks. So how we cultivate healthy bi-directional networks. Our networks are so important for us, and we need to make sure they're healthy. If you decide to pursue a health goal and you hang around really unhealthy people, they're likely not going to help you get there, and they may even take you in the other direction. And so in a time of social media, when we teach everyone that like the more people or the more friends or likes you have, the better, that's so not true on everything we know about hope and are the importance of networks and of healthy networks, that really help us in pursuing our best and highest self. So that is the N, and then the E is eliminating challenges. And we say this is like the hardest one. This is what our mind does to stop us from hope. So things like rumination, when we, go over and over and over things that have happened in the past, when we worry about things in the future, when we internalize failure, try to control things outside of our control. So much of what our mind says is not true. We have automatic negative thoughts that can just start happening. And so, really, we use our stress skills and happiness habits to help navigate these things our mind does. Because, really, in the present, usually everything is okay. It's just when we get up in our mind that things start looking differently. So, our programming is all around really going in detail about the Shine framework and really learning these skills and how to rewire our brain so that we can start making habits of these more so than some of the other things we might do. So, and I've been super healthy for the last 10 years. I'm off all meds, and I've been, I feel so deeply, and I used to think that was a negative thing, and I used to think I'd get stuck in those feelings forever, and I would if I wasn't conscious about how I was processing them and what I was doing, especially around those challenges. But I'm just really proactive about the framework. I do everything I talk about, and it doesn't mean I don't feel horrible or I still have suicidal ideations. I know how to manage them. I know that it's really around hopelessness and that I've got to look at my hopelessness and I've got to manage it in better and healthier ways and be diligent about it. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really important. As I mentioned, we went through that on Kathryn's podcast, so please check it out. But I think it's really important for her to share it on this podcast for my listeners, because I do have a lot of listeners who have different disabilities. And so as we talk about hope, I'm sure that there's somebody there listening with and without a disability that this is going to touch, and just bringing more awareness and visibility on that is really important.
it just amazes me, like the capacity of the human spirit to navigate challenges and to teach us and to, get through life. Like that is what feels amazing to me. So, when I'm down, what I know that I need more than is to laugh at something, to watch a video to
Mm.
make myself laugh or to, I study people to learn how they're just dealing with it. It's amazing to me. I mean, I thought, and that's really, that's one of the other, kind of a key moment in my life is I met someone by the name of Paul Goetzke in same last name as me when I moved to Annapolis, Maryland. So I moved there. I didn't know anyone. And everyone kept saying, "Do you know the Goetzkes? Do you know the Goetzkes?" And I thought, but it's a big family in Annapolis, Maryland. And I'd never even met another Goetzke outside of my family. So I thought I have to meet them. And I met them, and I met Paul Goetzke, who had been in an accident and was paralyzed and was in a motorized cart. And we met for coffee. And, I sat there thinking, how is it that my dad is not here? And Paul Goetzke has this horrendous thing happen to him, changes his life, and he's showing up to work, you know. Um, it's yeah, I love Paul so much. But he's showing up and he's engaging. Like that to me is I've got to understand this.
Mm. Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a battle and like an everyday work at it on yourself, and then with your mission to help other people figuring out how to become more hopeful and less hopeless. I just think that's such a a beautiful thing that you're doing, and how you've had these interactions, like you just mentioned, that's had an amazing impact on your life and your career trajectory. I see other people with disabilities who show up, and it motivates me to do the same thing when I feel down and I get praise for something that I'm doing, and it keeps me going because I know that the more that like I show up, like I'm
Mhm.
sure you see with Paul, like I am making an impact on somebody else.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's so important that you do. Like everyone has value, like you don't, uh, like life throws us so many challenges. There are so many things we go through. I look at the numbers with kids, and kids are dying by suicide because of relationships or because of like grades, failing at grades, thinking that the world is over. And I would do anything to have my dad here, you know. And I also feel so blessed and honored to be able to do this work and to have met the people I've met along the way that have taught me so much. Everyone that I meet, I learn so much about hope from, and I infuse it into all of my work. Dr. Myron Belfors, he's a Harvard Catalyst. He's one of the most brilliant child psychiatrists in the world and the most compassionate human. And he's mentored me and been a father like figure to me. Dr. Edward Barksdale too. But these people have given their time and energy, and I study and learn and then infuse it into the work of how we teach hope, because I, I we I don't want anyone dying by suicide. There is nothing, there is always a way to manage your despair, and there was always a way to get from helplessness to action. And it's just being taught the skills how to. I am certain that if I had known what I know now, like my dad would be here. He was stuck in a persistent state of hopelessness, and it was very learned. And you can learn how to hope.
Wow. Yeah, I agree 100%. And
Not
again,
easy. It's not
yes.
easy. I'm not saying it's easy, yet it's possible.
Mhm, definitely. Do you have any projects or what do you have coming up for 2025?
We are launching Chicago as a hopeful city. So I'm very excited and grateful to start getting the work. It's my hometown. I grew up in Chicago, in Oak Park, a suburb. And so being able to do the work in my hometown is really meaningful to me, and working with kids and, especially kids in the inner city, um, and being able to evolve the programming to meet their needs. We launched a program with the VA that I absolutely love. I'm working on potentially one for the prison system. Yeah, and just also maybe an app. So maybe a Shine Hope app. Uh, and just to keep evolving and learning, being able to provide programs to people in ways that they understand and need it to the best of my ability, you know. And I love the podcast. And I love that you were on the podcast, so you can learn all of Travis's Shine skills if you listen. I think it's so fun to learn what people are doing. How are we navigating all of this, like in practical ways that others can learn from, you know?
Hmm. I've learned so many things from my guest, especially this year when I restarted my podcast back in March. So I just really appreciate the people that I've had the opportunity to interview and talk with. And, I just think you're such an amazing human being
Oh,
for not only just the work that you're doing, but just who you are as a person. So I'm just really grateful to have a conversation with you.
thank you. The feelings are mutual. Absolutely, Travis. Appreciate you a
Well,
lot.
before we go, where can people find you?
So you can find me at the shinehopecompany.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and all the social media channels, Kathryn Goetzke as well. But yeah, through shinehopecompany.com is a good way too. Or ifred.org. That's the nonprofit. A lot of my work's happening around Shine Hope Company right now so that we can support the global work we want to do around the goal is to have the company to do most of the work and then the nonprofit to do low income areas, low and middle income countries. And so, yeah, continue to expand our knowledge base.
And then your podcast, The Hope Matrix.
The Hope
Podcast
Matrix.
Matrix.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yep.
Yes. And I
Yes.
have a book, the biggest little book about hope too.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah.
There we go.
Yes. Uh-huh.
You're everywhere, which is great. And whatever I can do to amplify your voice because it's surely needed. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Travis. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the message. Appreciate it a lot.
Of course.